Welcome, this is Najma Minhas with Global Village Space. I'm joined today by the former High Commissioner to India, Ambassador Abdul Basit, who's currently a president of an Islamabad think tank. Abdul Basit, thank you so much for joining me today.
Thank you very much for having me. Greatly appreciate.
I really wanted to get your thoughts on what has just happened yesterday when Modi sent his letter. Do you feel this is a coup d'etat by Pakistani foreign policy and the recent speech that General Bajwa made about burying the past?
Coup d'etat is a strong word. I would not use that because as I look at this letter of greeting signed by Prime Minister Modi at three different levels. First is obviously a message to Pakistan and the people of Pakistan that India is willing to move ahead and kind of normalize its relations with Pakistan at the tactical level.
Right.
But do not expect anything from us, from India, at the strategic level.
Mm-hmm.
Second message is obviously to the people of India that it is Pakistan which severed or kind of downgraded its relations with India. Now Pakistan is kind of asking to normalize the relationship, and since Prime Minister Modi explicitly mentioned or repeated the trite mantra of terrorism and hostility, it was kind of a message to the Indian people that so long as that India has not conceded anything in return to Pakistan. So it was Pakistan's decision post 5th August 2019, and it is Pakistan's decision to restore the status quo ante. And third message was to the international community, obviously, that the core problem between Pakistan and India is terrorism and alleged violence emanating from Pakistan. So this is how I look at this letter.
What do you think is driving it? Because, I mean, this is coming on the last couple of weeks where we've seen that once again, the two countries have agreed on the recommitment to the ceasefire line of 2003. We've seen that the Indus Water Committee, both members are meeting this week. We've seen, you know, and then Modi's tweet to Prime Minister Imran Khan asking and hoping that he does well after Corona. And then this letter.
So obviously it hasn't come out of the blue. There has been some diplomacy behind the scenes, and I'm not privy to those diplomatic off-stage efforts. But I think there are pressures, both regional, international, and we took a decision on 5th of August 2019. But unfortunately, we were not able to build enough pressure on India, international pressure on India. Mm-hmm. So you must have thought that perhaps it may be useful to engage with India rather than keeping ourselves or keep our relations in a mode which is not producing or yielding much for Pakistan.
So do you think we've given up, does this mean that we've now given up our stance on India reverting back to Kashmir pre-August the 5th, 2019?
I would be hesitant to draw this inference because as far as Kashmir is concerned, Pakistan is on, so to say, on terra firma. We have a very strong legal and diplomatic position on the dispute. And there is no reason for Pakistan to be showing radical or drastic flexibility on the issue. I know for a fact that during the last 15 or 20 years, Pakistan's position, unfortunately, on the dispute itself has been weakened for a variety of reasons. Mm-hmm. But because if you start from President Musharraf onwards, you will see as to how we ourselves have not been able to negotiate properly with India. But I would still not like to think that Pakistan is backtracking from its principled position on Jammu and Kashmir, because that is the only, in my view, the dispute which continues to, bedevil our relationship.
There's two elements to this, right? One is the 1947 position, right? And then yes, the more recent, post August the 5th, 2019 position, where Imran Khan, Prime Minister Imran Khan, took a very strong stance and said that until things don't go back to the de facto position, we will not talk to India. Yet now we are seeing these conciliatory moves. So it's regarding that position that I'd like to ask you. Do you think we've backed off from that position? Have we come to realize that peace is more important?
No, peace is more important, and peace cannot be guaranteed without resolving the Jammu and Kashmir dispute. It is fundamental to understand. As far as this government's position, I think, in my personal assessment, I think it is now very difficult for any government in India, even if it is after 5 years there is a Congress government, it will be very difficult for the government, any government in India, to now revoke these amendments to the constitution, which were in any case unconstitutional. The only face saver for any government could be that the Supreme Court of India takes a decision and declares these unconstitutional amendments null and void. But that would not happen unless New Delhi itself encourages the Indian Supreme Court to go down that route.
Right. Right.
Otherwise, I do not think that the BJP would restore the pre-5th August 2019 situation as far as the
it's always
legal
worth
status.
Taking an aggressive position, an aggressive posture, because end of the day, everyone then talks about reverting back to just before that particular posture and not the one many years before that. So I'd like to read to you a tweet that Praveen Sohini, who is the editor of Force, did yesterday. He writes, "I am asked what is cooking between India and Pakistan. Cannot be a good meal if outside cooks are involved and in-house cooks are disinterested." So I want to ask you, India and Pakistan on many occasions have, through outside involvement, gone ahead and made some kind of cold peace. They haven't lasted very long. So what is your thoughts on this? Do you think outside players are involved in this particular posturing as well between the two countries? And secondly, how long will it last if they are involved?
I think this time down, we do need third-party mediation or international involvement, because bilaterally we have seen that India has continued procrastinating and prevaricating on Kashmir. So in my view, and I have been saying so during the last 2 years at least, that we cannot, there is no bilateral space left for Pakistan and India to really move forward on Jammu and Kashmir. So I am all for a third-party mediation, international involvement, in order to, for our two countries to be pushed towards a solution as per the aspirations of the people of Jammu and Kashmir. So I think if there is a third-party involvement, that would augur well for the entire process.
But isn't your assumption that the third party is actually working towards peace in Jammu and Kashmir? What if the third party is actually not looking at that part of the equation and rather looking at just India and Pakistan and thinks that they need to work out their differences other than Kashmir so that they can continue working in the region? So, I mean, let's be frank.
It is possible.
The United States, for example.
Yeah, it is possible. And here I would hope that we do understand how India operates and how it, in the past, got Pakistan involved, bogged down in peripheral issues. Mm-hmm. So we need to avoid that kind of a cul-de-sac to be again find ourselves in a blind alley. And that would be the test of our diplomacy, in my view. Whether we again kind of get inveigled into a process which produces nothing, which is more of talks and talking about peripheral CBMs. Why not to ask India up front that, okay, you can't revoke the amendments that you have made, but why not to release all the Hurriyat leadership? Why not to demilitarize occupied Kashmir? Why not to revoke all the draconian laws as per PSA, DA, and so on and so forth? Right. Why not to allow UN Human Rights Commissioner's team to visit? So these are the things we need to kind of, ask India upfront. If we get engaged again in a process, as we had, composite dialogue, then we had UFA joint statement of 10 July 2015, then 9 December 2015 joint statement framework. All those frameworks could not help the two countries to bridge the gap, to bring about harmony or normalize our relations. So it is high time that we should understand where India is coming from, what is their worldview, and then try our best to get Jammu and Kashmir.
Is this how you think we should approach the Modi offer right now? I mean, we should approach it cautiously and put upfront our demands for how we think we should go forward.
Absolutely. I'm still very skeptical about Prime Minister Modi when it comes to Kashmir. And that's why we need to be upfront about it. So in order to gauge at the very beginning, at the very outset, as to whether or not India is willing to move ahead decisively on the Jammu and Kashmir dispute. Right. If we get ourselves involved into, kind of I can also imagine that diplomacy, you cannot really produce results overnight. It takes time. But since Shimla Agreement, now it is more than 50 years, we are kind of engaging with India bilaterally. Mm-hmm. But India has always used these bilateral talks to buy time. And this is after 5th of August, India does need time to consolidate its illegal occupation or annexation of Jammu and Kashmir. Right. And we all know how demography of the region is also being changed. They have already issued 33 lakh domiciles to Indians to settle down in Jammu and Kashmir. Right. So, it's a complex issue. Let's suppose if India is willing to settle Siachen or make it a kind of, green park, because our Prime Minister is also very keen on climate change issues. So that there are possibilities that at the very beginning, we do see some progress on issues like Sar Creek and Siachen. But we should not be, these things should not make us complacent about Jammu and Kashmir dispute.
Right. Okay. So I'd like to now just take your attention to your book has just been published, Hostility. It's come at a very explosive time in Pakistani politics because recently Nawaz Sharif has applied for his passport and it hasn't been extended right now. And we know that the PDM is threatening to come on the streets as well. So your book has come at an interesting time. And one thing you argue in this book is that you see Prime Minister Nawaz Sharif during that tenure, when you were the High Commissioner in India, you felt he was pandering very much to Indian whims and desires. Now, what were those things that you had in mind when you say that? Why do you say that?
No, if you look at, from Kashmir you come to UFA agreement, and then you see Pathankot, what happened subsequently, and then the joint statement in Islamabad of 9 December 2015, all these things speak for themselves. I just try to, give details as to how these things happened. Because and that kind of made me very I know how excruciating this experience has been for me to write this book. Mm-hmm. But I wanted to write this to put things on record, because in our diplomacy most of the times we move whimsically, and this is not the way to at least deal with India, with our adversary. So my point was to bring these things on record. I do not wish to cast aspersions on anyone. I have also been very critical of this government Kashmir policy as well, if you look at the last 2 chapters of my book. Mm-hmm. So I'm a non-partisan guy, and I was grateful to Nawaz Sharif for giving me this assignment to represent Pakistan and India. It was a great honor for me. But the way
you criticized him several times in the book. So what were the things that he was doing which you felt that was not in Pakistan's interest, maybe, in your mind?
No, yes, obviously, I was, from Kashmir to Mumbai trial, and I have given all these details in my book as to how he conducted himself during the meeting with Prime Minister, his first meeting with Prime Minister Modi on 27 May when he came to attend his inauguration. Mm-hmm. What happened in that meeting? I was kind of, very uncomfortable when he did not raise the Kashmir issue at all, despite the fact that Prime Minister Modi kept on upbraiding Pakistan, accusing Pakistan of terrorism and violence and so on and so forth. So then at UFA itself, that was the second time that any joint Pakistan-India statement did not include Kashmir specifically. Then you come to, Pathankot, the way he kind of telephoned Prime Minister Modi and then assured him and then FIR was registered in Pakistan. In my view, in haste, there was no proof, no evidence shared by India with us to file, a case against Pakistanis. And then the way a special investigation team was sent to Pakistan with a very weak mandate. So it created, India did not give us anything in return. And I kept on telling the Prime Minister that India would go ahead with implementing its election manifesto. It will revoke Articles 370 and 35A, but nobody would listen to us.
Well, his supporters would argue that we have been doing and following a foreign policy which was an in-the-box strategy for 70 years. And he was pursuing peace, maybe let's describe it as an out-of-the-box strategy. And that it makes sense, given the fact that we had got no return in the past 70 years by doing things by the book, the way foreign policy was conducted in Pakistan. So, I mean, how would you respond to something like that?
Then, I know it's okay. If there is a change in Pakistan's policy, my job was to implement that policy. But then please let me know that there's a change in our policy and we will now pursue the whole Pakistan policy in this manner. Don't keep me in the dark. That was the whole point.
Right. So how would you perceive, for example, Prime Minister Imran Khan, when he came into power, everyone talks about Nawaz Sharif going to the inauguration of Prime Minister Modi in 2014. But when Prime Minister Imran Khan came to power, the first thing he made as his statement was, if India takes one step forward, we will take two steps forward. So we've seen a lot of dovish, so-called dovish, and I say that with caution, dovish and conciliatory statements made by Imran Khan.
Najma, I was the first one to criticize that.
Okay.
If you see my vlogs, my articles, I was the first one to say that ill behooved our Prime Minister to say that, knowing that where Prime Minister Modi was coming from. And I was again very critical of the government to say that war is not an option between Pakistan and India. Okay. So I'm very clear. I'm very clear about my views on India, the way we are conducting ourselves, whether it is Prime Minister Nawaz Sharif or Prime Minister Imran Khan, doesn't matter. So long as they explain to the people of Pakistan as what are their long-term ultimate objectives vis-a-vis India, I have no issue. The states can always change their policies. There is no problem. But that should be done within taking into account the national consensus which already exists. Then how it is done, that is the problem. Unfortunately, in our case, most of the time we get carried away.
So in your book, you mentioned several instances when Prime Minister Nawaz Sharif went over your head or didn't inform you of various events taking place. For example, you mentioned the letter in 2015 that he sent to Prime Minister Modi, that it was given to the Indian High Commissioner in Islamabad rather than you. Do you think he didn't? Why do you think he didn't trust you?
I do not know. Perhaps people in the Foreign Office never trusted me, and they played a kind of a role to create more and more chasm between Abdul Basit, the High Commissioner, and Prime Minister. Because, in every institution, there are problems and there are detractors everywhere. There are people in the Foreign Office, perhaps, who never liked me to be in that position. And at that point in time, which I did not write in my book, there were serious efforts, in 2014, after my meeting with the Hurriyat leadership, to get me transferred from India. But somehow that did not happen.
So you think maybe it was a foreign office politics rather than...
It is possible because they wanted me to, they were still, by 2014, there were possibilities of my coming back to Pakistan as Foreign Secretary. So some people never liked me to be seen in that position.
So I'd like to ask you about the role of the Indian businessman, Sajjan Jindal. What role do you think he played in India-Pakistan politics?
At that point in time, he played a very important role. And I think because he was the man who was in touch with both Prime Minister Modi and Prime Minister Nawaz Sharif after the election of Prime Minister Mr. Modi, the BJP. He was the person who convinced Prime Minister Nawaz Sharif to come to India and attend Prime Minister's inauguration. He was the person who was playing some role conveying messages on Kulbhushan Jadhav as well. So he kept, and then he played an important role. I mean, he was primarily a kind of messenger between the two prime ministers, a bridge between the two, so to say.
Was he successful?
I don't think so. He was successful, but obviously when it comes to Pathankot, he was successful. On Kulbhushan Jadhav, you say our Prime Minister did not mention Kulbhushan Jadhav in his speech, and then what our advisor then said on Kulbhushan, the dossier which we submitted to UN Secretary General, so our advisor then Sartaj Aziz said it is nothing more than some information, no hard facts in that dossier. So on many occasions, our own people kind of, scuttled our position on different issues. I do not know.
On Kulbhushan Jadhav, I wanted to ask you about that, in fact, that how do you think we made a mess of that case? Because we captured a serving officer who admitted to doing terrorism and helping terrorism in various parts of Pakistan, Karachi, Balochistan, and yet we've got nothing out of that. We have still not been able to make our case in front of the world. We've had Kulbhushan and we've had the Indian terrorism dossier as well. Why do you think Pakistan is not able to make that case in front of the world?
Because we are neither focused nor consistent. We take an initiative and somehow we lose, that momentum. And then we also make, come up in the public making inconsistent statements. As I just mentioned to you, what our advisor Sartaj Aziz said in our parliament, that there is nothing concrete on Kulbhushan Jadhav.
Right.
So, so if you do these things, obviously, then you start losing credibility on the international front.
Okay. So in your mind, what is it that we need to have between India and Pakistan to have sustainable India-Pakistan relations?
So first of all, I think we need to be very clear as to what are our bottom lines on important issues. One, we are sure, and there is national consensus, that these are our bottom lines. We cannot go beyond that. Only then will we be able to come up with
for Pakistan,
tools.
What should those bottom lines or red lines be for Pakistan?
For Pakistan, the red line should be that without resolving the Jammu and Kashmir dispute, Pakistan-India relations can never be normalized. This is as simple as that. Because I genuinely believe that the mistrust between the two countries is so deep that unless this Jammu and Kashmir, unless this dispute is resolved, there is simply no possibility, no question that our two countries will ever be able to put ourselves on a trajectory, on an irreversible trajectory of normalization. That is impossible. I have seen that in India, living there, and our history is replete with, we go one step forward and then two steps back, and this vicious cycle will continue. So it is important to be decisive, and also it is incumbent upon India to realize, if he wants to realize its global aspirations, it cannot do that unless it resolves the Jammu and Kashmir dispute, unless it normalizes its relations with Pakistan. So I think it serves interests of both the countries to sit across the table. I'm not against that. We all want peace with India, but it should be done in a dignified manner. And this is what I'm always, advised when I was the High Commissioner, advised my principals, my leadership back home.
Well,
and this is what I also advised when I would meet Ajit Doval or Jay Shankar, for that matter, or Sushma Swaraj. I always insisted that unless we resolve the Jammu and Kashmir, there is simply no possibility of a normal relationship.
Okay. Basat, thank you so much. And on that note, I'd like to thank you for your time. Inshallah, we will reach out to you again.
You're most welcome. Thank you very much for having me. Very kind of you.